Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Read and Reread. I am Angelia, and today it is time once again for a review of the last batch of short stories from my 30 Stories in 30 Days September Shorty project. This will be the penultimate discussion of stories because we are now currently in the final week, but this is from the week we just finished. So let's take a look at these 6 stories. If you read them also, if you've read any of them, let me know what you thought in the comments, if you agree or disagree with my thoughts on the stories. If you read other things by these authors, or now you feel like you want to read them or whatever. As always, say what you will, and I appreciate all your comments. September 19th, the story was There Will Come Soft Rains by Ray Bradbury. That was, for some reason, that was a tongue twister, and I will be editing out the 5 times I tried to say that title. Why is that a tongue twister? I don't know. I really liked this story. This is a kind of a premature assessment because I haven't read that many things by Ray Bradbury, but I feel like I like the short stories more than the novels, judging by the fact that I have stopped and DNF'd Fahrenheit 451 a couple of times. But I've read several of his short stories and really enjoyed them. So this particular story, and I think, I checked this anthology out from the library. It's a different American short story anthology than the ones that I own here at the house, because that story wasn't in them. And I originally checked out this huge, it was fatter than this book of just Ray Bradbury stories. And I had 3 stories. I had looked up some things about different stories. I had 3 stories in mind, and I thought, well, I'll do one of these stories into the project. And I checked out this huge anthology, and none of them were in it. So back that went, but I found the story I wanted in this one. And this is a pretty short story. And it seems like his stories do run on the shorter side, and just very short, impactful science fiction tales. And this particular one, the title comes from a poem by Sarah Teasdale, and the poem features prominently later in the story. And what we have at the offset is a house that is very automated. In the morning, a clock comes on and wakes everyone up and talks to them, and it rolls out the breakfast, and the garage goes up and down at the right times, and in the evening it makes dinner and reads aloud to the inhabitants, except that there aren't any inhabitants. It is a house with no living beings in it, and the house is just going through its machinations. And it's like Ray Bradbury predicted Alexa and Roomba and other things like that we now have to keep a house running without whether or not you're there. And as we read the story, we realize that something horrible has happened. It looks like a nuclear event, because the neighborhood is completely decimated and wiped out, and only this one house is standing and going through these everything's silent except the house going through these automations. So it's very eerie and unsettling, and then the poem comes in. So I really liked it. I thought for 1950, it was very prescient in terms of the automations and conveniences, and it did remind me, it kind of echoed with The Machine Stops, because in that story, people had come to rely on the machinations so intensely that when the machine stopped working, they completely crumbled. And then this is kind of the opposite. The people are gone, but the machine is still going. And I felt like, I think I put this in my community post, I felt like it sort of captured both that obsession with the danger of nuclear events that was so common in the 1950s, and then predicting our current, I don't know if you call it a reliance on automated things. I guess it depends on who you are. And some people now feel a little unsettled about that as well. So that was fun and kind of creepy and eerie to read. On the next one, I made an executive decision, and I changed up the story. And I had this anthology, well, not an anthology, a story collection by Lee Smith called Me and My Baby View the Eclipse. So this book came out, I think I got it as a new release. This was 1990. And this was around the time, or just at the end of the time, when I actually briefly was acquainted with Lee Smith because she was a visiting writer in the English department where I was doing my graduate studies. I was not a creative writing major. She was working with the people in the creative writing seminars. I was literature, but we were all together in the same department, and we took a lot of the same classes aside from the creative writing ones. So anyway, she was at the parties and all that kind of stuff. And she was like such a charming, funny, warm person. And a couple of my good friends at the time had her as their advisor, and they really loved working with her. But anyway, the first story that I picked, I kind of had remembered it as being a funny story that was sort of a spoof on the formula by which you're supposed to write silhouette romances. But when I started to reread it, it was seriously outdated and not a good representation of Lee Smith. And it had some unfortunate wording repetitively about a character that we would now say has developmental delays or cognitive challenges, but outdated word was used for this person. I was like, I don't like, nah, cut. So instead I picked a story that is a much stronger story called Tongues of Fire. It is pretty long. It's encroaching into novella territory because I think it's about, I don't know how many pages, 30 pages? Anyway, it was really good. The opening of the story, the first sentence is really great. And if you have never read Lee Smith, it is, she's a Southern writer. I don't know if she still lives in North Carolina, but they're funny and they're warm and they're, sometimes they are historical, sometimes they're contemporary, but this one is set in the 50s. And here's the opening line. The year I was 13, 1957, my father had a nervous breakdown, my brother had a wreck, and I started speaking in tongues. And this is about a girl who is kind of getting lost in the mix during this terrible year when her father is having a severe depression. Her mother is a consummate Southern lady who is trying to hold it together and deny most of the problems and keep things very prim and proper. Her brother is off, who's much older, is off in college, and he flames out and has a car wreck. And she is gravitating towards this kind of, this dalliance with religious mania. And she befriends a girl at school from what you would call the wrong side of the tracks if you asked her mother, a girl that she's not supposed to be hanging out with. And she finds out that this girl lives out in the boonies, outskirts of town, and they go to a very old-fashioned Southern little tiny evangelical church, and this girl's mother speaks in tongues and passes out at church every week. And she is mesmerized by this whole scene. And so she does all kinds of sneaky things to get to spend more time with this girl. And I love the description. Her mother keeps trying to set her up to spend time and spend the night with the kind of girls that she thinks she should hang out with, the, soon to be debutantes and just, the people that go to their church. And her mother has this whole hierarchy of the quality of people based on which church they attend in town, and very, very 1950s point of view. But then Tammy Lester asks her to spend the night. And here's the description. Tammy Lester, shunned by subdabs, sent to detention, noticed by older boys. I couldn't believe it. I admired Tammy Lester more than any other girl in my entire class. I'd watched her from afar the way I'd watched the Baptists. Tammy Lester lived out in the country someplace. In a trailer, it was rumored. She was driven into school each morning by one or the other of her wild older brothers in a red pickup truck. These brothers slicked back their hair with grease. They wore their cigarette packs rolled up in the sleeves of their t-shirts. And best of all, she was missing a tooth right up in front. Nobody had taken her to the dentist yet to get it fixed. The missing tooth gave Tammy a devilish, jaunty look. Also, as I would learn later, she could whistle through this hole and spit 20 feet. Okay, well, Tammy sounds like a real jewel. And they do become very good friends. And our main character, Karen, is just absolutely enraptured with this family that lives out basically in a junkyard. There's parts of things strewn all over the yard, and random dogs and cats, and she just loves everything about this. It's the total opposite of her sterile, boring home life, which is falling apart anyway. So it goes through this whole saga, and it moves on into also when she goes to summer camp, and it's just really good. It's a really good story. So I forget about that other story, but read Tongues of Fire by Lee Smith instead. Then I moved into a contemporary book that came out more recently, and maybe I don't know if it was this year or last year. Let's check. 2020, a couple years ago, 3 years ago. This is a story from the Office of Historical Corrections by Danielle Evans. She has a previous collection of stories called Before You Suffocate Your Own Fool Self, and she's been on my list of authors that I've been meaning to read for a while, so now is the time with the short story project. So I checked this out, and I did read a couple stories out of this book, and the one that I had put on the list was Happily Ever After, because it was the first story. And but then I did read a couple other stories along the way, and I really am liking this author. There's a novella at the end that is the title story, and I want to read that before I return the book. This is about a young Black woman named Lissa who works in the gift shop of a tourist attraction that has replicated the Titanic. And so Titanic enthusiasts come there, and then there's all this junk that they can buy in the tourist shop. And a pop star, rock star guy decides to make a music video in this setting. And she kind of gets cast in a background part as she's kind of dressed like a mermaid, but she's working in the gift shop. And that's what's happening on the surface. But really the story is about grief and medical racism, because she's reflecting back. This is a time when she is kind of adrift and figuring out what she wants to do right after the death of her mother from cancer. And I only read 2 or 3 stories, and the issue of a mother dying from cancer came up multiple times. So I don't know if that has any kind of autobiographical connection with Evans. Sometimes when something comes up in a story again and again, you find out that is in the author's actual life, and there are including it in fictional representations in different ways. I don't know. Although the story has a lot of humor in it, she does touch pretty seriously on this issue of medical racism and the things that she experienced during her mother's illness in that regard. And first of all, she talks about how she had to spend a lot of her own personal energy on getting dressed and styled in a certain way in order to be taken seriously at the hospital to get the information and the care that she needed for her mother. At first she says, there's always something they wouldn't tell everybody, and she wanted to be told, which meant she had to look like a real person to them, like a person whose mother deserved to live, like somebody who loves somebody. Whatever information they weren't going to give her, whatever medicine they didn't bother trying on Black women, she would have to ask for it directly so it went into the file if they refused, but ask for without seeming stupid or aggressive or cold. She'd have to be poised and polite through her frustration, which thankfully retail had prepared her for. Tell me what you would tell a white woman, her face said. A white woman with money, her clothes said. Please, her tone said. So, I've read a number of different news stories or journalistic pieces about that topic, and it really is maddening. It's related to the topic of women in general struggling with being taken seriously by healthcare providers, but it's tenfold worse for Black women. I thought, how exhausting to have to add that layer of effort into such a difficult situation. So that was the story that I read. I did read another story about and it was funny and terrible at the same time. What was the story I read? Boys Go to Jupiter, about a white girl who makes there's no planning. She just makes a poor decision to post a picture of herself wearing a Confederate flag printed bikini. It goes viral and causes this huge debacle at her university. And that one too, just her stubborn cluelessness, and this, I mean, the story could have been called Double Down, but that one was also really good. And so I do want to read some more before I send it back, but I'm glad to have discovered this author that was new to me. All right, then we had an old classic that many of us have read sometime in our school life, or maybe just because you heard it was a classic story. That was The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gillman. And that was written, I think it was in 1894, if I'm remembering correctly. I read it out of this book you've seen about 10 times, American Short Stories, Norton Anthology. But it is in almost any anthology that covers that time period. And it is a semi-autobiographical story. During her first marriage, after she gave birth to a daughter, she experienced an extreme postpartum depression. And this is a fictionalized representation of how she felt during that time. And in this story, there is an unnamed woman who she is staying in a kind of a 1894 version of an Airbnb, a country house, a big house with a beautiful garden that her husband has rented to help her in her recovery. He thinks, based on medical opinions of the time, that what she needs to do is have complete rest and rest her weary little female brain and not have too much interaction with people and not read very much, don't write, just rest and maybe take a little walk around the garden, and that's it. And really, this particular approach to a cure just drives her increasingly mad, and her fragile mental health begins to spiral as she is left with nothing but the four walls to look at, which have a hideous, falling apart yellow wallpaper that has been picked and peeled by previous children who lived in this room as a nursery room. And so I don't want to say too much about it, because reading her narrative and how her mental health progresses through the story, actually degresses, that's what the experience of reading the story is all about. The notions that are timeless in here are, first of all, just the reality of postpartum depression and psychosis, and how it is still poorly misunderstood and still underestimated, and the disregarding of her, what's important to her. So it's a feminist story. It's a scary story. It's a classic story of psychological terror. Now we're going to zigzag back up to the present day with If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffery. I bought this book. I want credit for the fact that I bought this book before it hit the big time, because I read some good reviews of it and I thought, oh, that sounds interesting, and I got it. And then it ended up, I think it was National Book Award list. I have to look that up, from last year. And also now it is shortlisted for the Booker Prize. I wasn't terribly shocked that it was on the long list for the Booker, although there were some other story collections that I personally liked more. I don't know if they fit in the time frame or not, but I wasn't mad that it was on the list, but now it's on the short list as well. And this was a collection that I liked it. I thought it was a good first book. I didn't love it. I didn't emotionally connect to the characters the way I did with some other story collections from last year. But I've talked about those books, especially Night of the Living Rez. But anyway, I am not on the judging panel of these committees. So anyway, I'm happy for this author. And he's on the short list. A lot of people will read the book that didn't know about it otherwise, and that's a good thing. So I wanted to circle back and reread one of the stories that I remembered in particular. And it is a story called Independent Living. And it is about our main character throughout these stories, Trelawney, when he was working as an administrative assistant at a senior living facility, a low-income facility. One of the main thematic threads in this whole collection is about economic instability, and Trelawney He's of Jamaican descent. His parents immigrated to the U.S. and he eventually goes to college. He goes a little bit late. He works for a few years and then he goes. And then right when he is graduating, it's around 2008, 2009 when we had an economic downturn. And so he cannot find any real work. And it gets into that whole mythology of, well, you've really made it if you go to college. And then all the doors are going to open and you're going to have all these great job prospects. And that's just not always true. So here he is with his degree, and he is living in his car and hiding the fact that he's living in his car and working at the desk of this senior living facility, where he basically tries to track down whether or not the residents have more money than they've reported so that he can jack up their rents. And he knows this is kind of a soul-sucking job, but this is what he has at the moment. And he also sneaks around and tries to use the showers or sleep overnight in vacant apartments and the model apartment, and just all these different subterfuges to conceal the fact that he's homeless and that he can no longer live with his dad. He doesn't really want to move in with his brother for various family reasons that you will understand if you read the whole book. A series of events that challenge Trelawney's morals and ethics occur during this story, and he has to question, how far is he willing to go to preserve himself during this personal economic crisis. So anyway, so that is Independent Living by Jonathan Escoffery. But that's it. That was the 6 stories from the past week. And I will be on my little trip when I get back. We will have come to the end of the month, and I will make one more video about the last batch of stories. So I hope that you are enjoying your reading, whether you're reading any of these things or completely different things. I hope it is all good stuff. Let me know what you're up to. And I will be back again soon. I have several videos planned, and I'm not sure what order they're going to post in. But I know that coming up in some order or another, I have this and my October TBR. I also need to make a haul video, but that one might be when I get back. And then the rest of the stories. I don't know. Something's coming. You'll see it. Have a great day. Bye.